My beloved child. Do not move past this moment too quickly. Something has been waiting for you here, quietly, almost as though it knew the exact second your heart would be ready to receive it. You may have arrived with questions you have not spoken aloud, carrying feelings you have tried to understand on your own, but what you are about to hear was meant to find you in a strangely personal way. Pause here for a moment, because the message unfolding before you is not about fear, loss, or chasing someone who has turned away. It is about words that have been held back for far too long, emotions that have grown stronger in silence, and a person you love who has been searching for the courage to finally say what their heart has refused to forget. There is a reason you have felt as though something remained unfinished. You tried to convince yourself that perhaps you imagined the connection, that perhaps the memories meant more to you than they did to the other person, or that silence itself was the answer you were supposed to accept. Yet deep inside you, there has been a quiet resistance to that conclusion. Something never fully settled. Something never truly closed. Even when life became busy and your attention moved elsewhere, certain moments returned without warning. A memory, a sentence, a feeling you could not explain. And while you were trying to understand why, the person connected to those memories was facing a truth of their own. They have been waiting to tell you something. Not because they enjoy keeping you uncertain. Not because they wanted you to spend your days wondering. The truth is more complicated than that. For a long time, they did not know how to approach you without reopening emotions they themselves could barely control. They rehearsed conversations in their mind and abandoned them before they ever happened. They imagined how you might respond. They wondered whether you would listen, whether you would turn away, whether you had already moved beyond the place where their words could matter. Every possibility made them hesitate, yet none of that hesitation made the message disappear. In fact, it grew. There are words that lose meaning when they are delayed, but there are other words that become heavier. These are the words they have been carrying. Every passing day added something to them. A memory. A regret. A realization. A moment when they almost contacted you. A night when they stared at an unfinished message and erased it because suddenly every sentence seemed too small for what they actually felt. They told themselves they would try again tomorrow. Then tomorrow came, and courage failed them again. But recently, something changed inside them, and this is where the story begins to become different from everything that came before. They realized silence was beginning to cost more than honesty. That realization did not arrive dramatically. It came quietly, almost painfully. They were alone with their thoughts when a memory of you surfaced, not one of the obvious memories, but something small. Maybe the way you listened when they were struggling. Maybe a simple expression on your face. Maybe the sound of your voice during a conversation they once took for granted. Whatever it was, it opened something in them. Suddenly they understood that what they missed was not merely your presence. They missed the version of themselves that felt safe enough to be real around you. That frightened them more than they expected. Because when someone can be replaced in our routine, we usually adjust. But when someone reaches a part of us no one else quite touches, distance becomes harder to explain. They tried to distract themselves. They tried to tell themselves they were simply nostalgic. They tried to reduce the connection to timing, circumstances, emotion, or coincidence. Yet every explanation eventually fell apart because one truth kept returning: what they felt for you never disappeared in the way they thought it would. And now they need you to know that. If they could place their message directly into your hands without fear, it would begin differently than you expect. They would not start by defending themselves. They would not begin with excuses. They would not ask you to immediately forgive anything or make a decision. They would start with something simpler. They would tell you, "I never stopped caring." Those words have lived inside them longer than you know. There were moments when their actions may have suggested the opposite. There were periods when their silence looked like indifference. You may have wondered how someone who once seemed to understand you could become so distant. You may even have questioned whether the connection mattered to them at all. But what you could not see was the private conflict underneath their quietness. They cared, yet they did not know what to do with that caring. They feared saying too much. They feared saying too little. Most of all, they feared discovering that they had waited so long that your heart no longer had room for their truth. This is why they have remained caught between reaching out and holding back. But there is something else they have been waiting to tell you, and this part is more difficult. They know they hurt you in ways they did not fully recognize at the time. Not necessarily through one dramatic betrayal or one unforgettable moment, but through uncertainty. Through inconsistency. Through words left unsaid when you needed clarity. Through moments when you were trying to understand where you stood and they did not give you the honesty you deserved. They may have believed that avoiding the conversation would prevent pain, but eventually they realized avoidance creates its own kind of wound. When someone matters deeply, confusion can ache more than a difficult truth. They see that now. And once they saw it, they could not unsee it. This is one reason their thoughts about you have recently become more intense. They are no longer remembering the story only from their own perspective. They have started imagining what the silence felt like from yours. They have replayed moments they once dismissed. They have remembered questions in your eyes that they avoided answering. They have recalled times when you gave them patience while they gave you uncertainty. The realization has humbled them. But do not misunderstand what I am showing you. This message is not asking you to forget your boundaries. It is not telling you to chase anyone, abandon your wisdom, or place your peace in someone else's hands. Love that is true does not require you to lose yourself. What is unfolding here is about understanding what was hidden, not surrendering your discernment. Their feelings may be real, but your heart still deserves consistency. Their regret may be sincere, but your future still deserves clarity. The message can matter without becoming a command. And this is precisely what they have begun to understand as well. They know words alone may no longer be enough. That realization has been unsettling for them because for a long time they imagined that if they could simply find the right sentence, everything would become easier. They thought there must be some perfect explanation that would make you understand every hesitation, every mistake, every period of silence. But recently they recognized something important. There is no magical sentence that erases what has already been felt. So their message is changing. It is becoming less about persuading you and more about finally being truthful with you. They want to tell you that there were moments when they almost chose courage. You came closer to hearing from them than you ever knew. There were nights when your name was on their screen. There were moments when they typed the first words, stopped, deleted them, then stared into silence afterward. Sometimes they feared interrupting your life. Sometimes pride stood in the way. Sometimes they convinced themselves you deserved peace more than another confusing conversation. But beneath every excuse was one deeper fear. What if you still mattered too much? Because if they reached out and discovered that the connection remained alive, they would no longer be able to pretend they had moved on emotionally. And if they reached out and discovered that you had closed the door, they feared they would finally have to face the consequence of waiting. So they remained still. Until something shifted. There was a moment recently when they heard or saw something that made them think about how quickly life changes. It may have been a conversation about missed chances. It may have been watching someone else choose honesty after years of hesitation. It may have been a quiet realization that tomorrow is not guaranteed to offer the same opportunities as today. Whatever triggered it, the effect was immediate. They thought of you. And for once, instead of pushing the thought away, they allowed themselves to follow it. They remembered your kindness. They remembered your strength. They remembered the way you sometimes understood what they were feeling before they could explain it. They remembered the conversations that seemed ordinary at the time but now feel strangely precious. Then came the memory they could not escape. The last moment when they had the chance to tell you the truth and chose silence instead. That memory has been following them. They have imagined what might have happened if they had spoken differently. Not because they believe the past can be rewritten, but because hindsight has finally shown them where fear controlled decisions that should have been guided by honesty. They recognize now that sometimes people do not lose connection because love disappears. Sometimes connection becomes buried beneath pride, timing, misunderstanding, insecurity, and the assumption that there will always be another chance. But eventually, another chance stops feeling guaranteed. That is why this message feels different. They do not want another season to pass with you believing things that are not true. They do not want you believing that you were forgettable. You were not. They do not want you believing that your kindness went unnoticed. It did not. They do not want you believing that the connection meant nothing simply because they failed to communicate what it meant. It mattered. And perhaps the hardest truth for them to admit is that they underestimated the space you occupied in their heart until distance revealed it. Sometimes presence becomes familiar. People assume what feels meaningful today will still be available tomorrow. Then absence teaches a lesson familiarity never could. This is what happened within them. Your absence made certain truths louder. The things they once considered small became the very things they remembered most. But there is another layer to this, and this is the part they have struggled hardest to put into words. They were afraid of being fully known by you. You saw more than they expected. Not because you knew every detail of their life, but because you sensed what existed behind their defenses. They could hide uncertainty from others. They could appear composed, confident, unaffected. But around you, there were moments when the mask became difficult to hold. You noticed shifts in their energy. You heard what they avoided saying. You recognized when something was wrong even when they insisted they were fine. Being seen like that felt comforting, and terrifying. Because when someone sees the truth beneath the surface, they also become capable of touching the places we protect most carefully. This person was not only afraid of losing you. Part of them was afraid of needing you emotionally more than they wanted to admit. So they created distance before vulnerability could become undeniable. And yet the distance did not protect them. It only proved what they were trying not to feel. This is why their message contains an apology that goes deeper than, "I am sorry." They want to say, "I am sorry I made you question what was real because I was afraid to admit what was real inside me." Read that slowly within your heart. Because their regret is not simply that they missed you. Their regret is that they allowed fear to create confusion where honesty might have created understanding. Still, heaven is not revealing this so you will build fantasies around someone else's choices. You are being shown a deeper principle: the truth of your value is not determined by another person's ability to express what they feel. Someone can care deeply and still be emotionally unprepared. Someone can recognize your worth and still fail to show up properly. Someone can miss you and still have work to do before they are capable of meeting you with the steadiness you deserve. This is important because your next chapter cannot be built on potential alone. You have grown through the silence too. You may not notice it because growth often feels like survival while it is happening, but you are not standing in the same emotional place you once stood. You have learned how painful it is to wait for clarity from someone who is still searching for clarity within themselves. You have learned the difference between connection and consistency. You have learned that love can be meaningful and still require boundaries. You have begun to understand that being chosen should not feel like constantly proving why you are worth choosing. And strangely, they have sensed that change in you. This is another reason they have become more urgent inside. They feel that you are no longer waiting in the same way. Perhaps you stopped checking for signs. Perhaps you stopped imagining every possible outcome. Perhaps your energy began returning to your own life. Perhaps you started protecting the peace you once sacrificed to understand them. They noticed something had shifted even from a distance. And that frightened them. Not because they want control over you, but because they realized that your heart was finally learning how to continue without an answer from them. For the first time, they understood that silence has consequences. People sometimes believe a connection will remain exactly where they left it, waiting patiently for their return. But hearts move. People heal. Priorities change. What remains available forever in memory may not remain available forever in real life. They know that now. And this is where their message becomes more vulnerable. They want you to know they are not reaching for the version of you who once waited endlessly. They know that version of you has changed. They are beginning to understand that if they come toward you now, they must meet who you have become, not who you were when they left you with uncertainty. That means showing more courage, more honesty, more responsibility, and less assumption. The message they have been carrying has slowly transformed from, "Will you still choose me?" into something more mature. "Can I finally show you the truth and allow you to decide what it means for your life?" That difference matters. Because love without freedom becomes pressure. Genuine connection must allow both hearts to speak honestly. They want their truth heard, but somewhere inside, they have accepted that they cannot control your answer. And yet there is one truth they are still terrified to say. This is the sentence that has stopped them every time. They have started it in their mind countless times. Sometimes it begins with your name. Sometimes with, "I should have told you this sooner." Sometimes with, "I don't know if this changes anything." But the destination is always the same. They want to confess that something they allowed you to believe was never completely true. You may have believed they left because their feelings faded. That is not the whole truth. You may have believed another priority became more important than you. That is not the whole truth either. You may have believed they were certain about walking away. They were not. In fact, there was a private reason behind their distance that they never explained because admitting it would have required revealing something vulnerable about themselves. And this reason is connected directly to the message they now want you to read. They have carried this secret quietly because they thought revealing it would make them appear weak. But the longer they hid it, the more the misunderstanding between you grew. They watched you interpret their silence through the only information available to you, and there were times when they almost corrected the story. Almost. But fear won. Until now. Something has changed enough inside them that the truth is becoming harder to hide than to reveal. The strange part is that they no longer want to tell you because they expect a particular outcome. They want to tell you because they cannot continue allowing you to remember the past incorrectly. They need you to know what was really happening inside them during one specific moment, the moment you may have believed they stopped caring. They remember exactly where they were. They remember what you said. They remember what they wanted to say back. They remember the feeling in their chest when they chose the safer response instead of the truthful one. And they have regretted that choice ever since. The message they are holding begins with the words they should have spoken then. I was scared because what I felt for you was becoming more real than I knew how to handle. That is the beginning. But it is not the biggest revelation. Because after admitting their fear, they want to tell you what happened immediately afterward, something you never knew, something that changed how they saw the connection from that day forward. They walked away from that moment appearing calm. But privately, they broke their own rule. They had promised themselves they would create distance, stop looking back, and move forward without reopening what they believed they could not handle. Yet within hours, they did something completely different. Something involving you. Something they have never told you. And when you hear what it was, many pieces of their later behavior may suddenly make sense. This is the part of the message they have rewritten again and again because they do not know how you will react once you understand what they did, what they discovered, and why it made them realize that their feelings for you were far deeper than they had admitted. They have finally reached the sentence they can no longer erase. And just beyond that sentence is the truth they have been waiting all this time to tell you.